Actress Illeana Douglas has that face that you have seen, period, whether it's on movies or on TV screens. Now she wants another title, and it's actually her second book because the Connecticut woman is back in Connecticut, and she's now talking about Connecticut in the movies. And we say good morning to you.
Thanks, Matt. Nice to be here.
Nice to have you here. I got to tell you, the book is fascinating, and we'll get to that in a minute. I was doing a little research. We always talk about Connecticut being a movie center because of the tax cuts and the business end. But in terms of plots, I just to run a little list of the movies that were filmed and took place in Connecticut.
Yes.
There's pages and pages and pages.
That's why I wrote a book.
And that makes a good book idea, doesn't it?
Yes. Well, it was something that always fascinated me, this perception of Connecticut in the movies, Christmas in Connecticut, but then you have these very dark films like The Ice Storm. And I wanted to write a book that would be, there's a movie for everybody. There's nearly 100 films in the book going back to the silent era. And it covers the industrial, Waterbury, Mystic Pizza, New London.
There's a history in Connecticut that you can easily pick out through its representation in films.
Yes, both good and both light and dark. Sometimes we think, oh, okay, well they got that completely wrong. Sometimes some of the early 1930s movies are a mythological Connecticut that was created by Hollywood but still brought people to the state.
It wasn't even Connecticut, it was the country. And for me, as a young kid growing up in New York, my country was the Catskills. But for a lot of these films, the country went northbound on 95.
Yes.
When 95 came around.
Right. Well, they created this idea of transformation. I call them country living comedies.
Right.
In which a slick, sophisticated New Yorker goes to the country for the weekend and are surrounded by real folk. Wants to live here.
Well, you mentioned Christmas in Connecticut. That pretty much sums up that plot in terms of the New York City girl who's just been fooling everyone by thinking that she's a chef.
Yes.
And now has to actually do the part.
Yes, exactly. And yet a house becomes central to her falling in love with Connecticut and wanting to be here, which is sort of ironic because that's kind of what happened to me.
Well, let's talk about you for a second because I think that's a very interesting point. Lest you think that the actress has who's been in so many movies and so many TV shows, lest you think that she has all this time to write a book. This is a passion of yours.
Completely.
You know movies based on your background and who you've hung out with, who your family is, but this is part of you, isn't it?
It was something that was always percolating in the back of my mind, and then when COVID hit and I was in Los Angeles, I set out to write the book, and I started to write about Connecticut movies, and then lo and behold, at night I found myself like a plot from one of the movies, scrolling through Zillow, thinking, I always did want to fix up an old farmhouse in the country.
And you did it because you started in the shoreline. You're back now living here, so everything has kind of come full circle for you.
Yes, all this, and the house, everyone asks about the house, and I really did, very much like the plot of Mr. Blandings, a shrewd real estate person who happens to be a friend of mine, Linda, tricked me, seduced me into buying an old farmhouse.
But you know what, I think that's a perfect word. Seduction works when it comes to Connecticut.
Just needs a little TLC.
That's right. I've lived here for 20 years, and I fell in love with Connecticut. When people ask you, and this is a fairly thick book, what movies that they should see to get a Connecticut 101, what do you tell them?
There is a chapter for everyone in this book. True crime, history, suburbia, Christmas movies, Hallmark movies, so there's something for everyone. But a couple of my favorite films, I have to say, Boomerang, which is about an unsolved murder that took place in 1924.
Oh my.
Boomerang, 1947 film by Elia Kazan.
Right.
Of
this
course,
is one of your
Swimmer.
favorites too.
The Swimmer. I mean,
Burt
look
Lancaster.
at Burt Lancaster.
Yeah.
This was shot in Westport and Fairfield, and this is all about, the dark suburbia of the late 1960s.
Yeah, well, very Stepford Wives. Oh, that one was here too.
The Stepford Wives is in the chapter on horror. That's where there's actually a lot of horror films.
Oh, yeah.
And again, going back to the early 60s, The Last House on the Left, Let's Scare Jessica to Death. Most of your favorites you'll find in here.
So you talk about coming back and getting seduced by a farmhouse.
Yes.
What chapter would those stories go in?
Well, that starts right in the introduction because, as you have to remember, I sold my house in California. I bought the old farmhouse, and I had a plumber where the pipes were bursting, and it was just like Blandings. I'm writing about Mr. Blandings builds his dream house, and
you're living the dream,
Blandings,
so to speak.
and I'm writing a book, and my contractor is calling me. You need to look at this. By the way, when they say can you come in here? It's never a good.
Yeah,
never good.
Unlike the movies, it doesn't get solved in 90 minutes to 2 hours, does it? There you go.
But as I'm writing about the book, that informed the book because I said, wow, now I went from writing about Connecticut, now I actually am a Connecticut resident, and I would leave. I drove all over the state to some places, again, the Quiet Little Corner. I'd always heard about the Quiet Little Corner, but I'd never actually been there.
And they're all covered in the book. We're gonna hear more about this. We can talk to Illeana Douglas for hours and hours.